Hi, this is Craig Stocks here for Utah Desert Remote Observatories. You can find us online at utahdesertremote.com. I want to talk through this image of M78, which is the bright reflection nebula here, and it's kind of nestled in this vast cloud of ionized hydrogen gas. I want to talk through the process from capture through processing. I'll probably go through most of it fairly quickly. This isn't really a tutorial on every piece, but rather just an overview of the process. There are a couple things I want to talk about a little bit specifically in Photoshop, though. I do have a second screen that you can't see, and I will be dragging the different pieces on and off of this main screen as we go. So to start, let's talk about how it was captured. I do almost all of my captures from the Utah Desert Remote Observatories. This is a picture of the observatory. You can see the telescope is situated here. Right now I've got the Takahashi FSQ 106, which is a wide field 530 millimeter focal length refractor. I'll be switching that out for the longer focal length plane wave CDK 12.5 shortly. And when I took this photo about a month ago, you could get a nice view of the zodiacal light in the sky just shortly after sunset. So to start with, I set up the remote operation using Voyager, and Voyager has a tool called the Web Dashboard Beta. It seems to me to be pretty well developed, but it gives you the ability to do most of your controls through a web type interface rather than the traditional interface. I use the traditional interface for most things, but for setting up sequences and especially setting up the field of view, I really like this virtual field of view. You can put in this case I put in M78 and it found it right here. I can just click and drag to position it within the frame, how I'd like it to be imaged. And I can even play with the camera rotation because the remote telescope does have a camera rotator. So I can fine-tune this to get just the composition that I want. And then I save that and go back to the basic Voyager to set up the sequence. So I would save this and then go to the main Voyager interface where I would configure the sequence. And this is just what the sequence looks like. I'm taking hydrogen and then red, green, and blue and luminosity frames. I'm doing 10-minute subs on the hydrogen and then 5 minutes each on red, green, blue, and luminosity. Cycling through just 3 each, so either 15 or 30 minutes on each filter, and then it moves to the next filter, refocuses, moves to the next filter, refocuses, and so forth. And I've got it set to do that, just kind of repeating over and over until around 12:30, when the target sets low enough it starts getting below 20 degrees, and that's really not much point in imaging beyond that. So this is how the sequence is set up. I basically put this sequence into a script and launch the script sometime around sunset, and Voyager just automatically does its thing. It turns on the telescope, points it, focuses, opens and closes the cover, and so forth. The only thing it doesn't do is automatically open and close the observatory. I still like to manually decide whether or not to open the observatory based on the weather. I do have the observatory program, so it will automatically close if the wind's too great, if it gets cloudy, if it gets wet, and if nothing else, it'll automatically close in the morning after or a little bit before sunrise. So this sets up the run. I get that started, go to bed. When I get up the next morning, I've got all my files ready to go. And the next step is to process them in Deep Sky Stacker. And this is what that file sequence looked like. And the important thing to notice here is, first of all, I loaded all of the frames in here, including the darks and the flats. And I like to do it in kind of a two-step process. First, I will check all the frames and do a register, and that lets me pick out any that have a particularly low score and evaluate those. And in this case, I did reject a couple of the frames that had low scores. The other important thing is I will choose one frame and designate it as the reference frame. And I do that by just right-clicking and then saying Use as Reference Frame. What that does is it tells Deep Sky Stacker that I want to use this frame, whether it's checked or not, to register all of the stacks so that they all are registered the same way. That way I can load them as a stack in Photoshop and they're already all aligned and I don't have to worry about that. So I will basically cycle through red, green, blue, hydrogen, luminosity, check them, stack them, uncheck them, stack the next group, and so forth, and cycle through all of those to create all of the files. I then go to Photoshop, and in Photoshop, if you've seen any of my tutorials before, you know I like to work in layers. I don't like to copy and paste into channels. I like to work in layers and designate what color each one of those layers is going to represent. So at this point I've got everything loaded, and yes, this is a large file, but this is really the way I save them. And I load them all into layer groups. So for instance, if you look at the layer palette over here on the lower right, you can see at the bottom I have a group of red, green, blue, luminosity, and then I combined all of those into a single RGB to move forward. Sometimes I do that, sometimes I don't. In this case I did so that I could do a star removal from an RGB layer rather than from each one of the filters individually, just to save myself from some processing time. And really an awful lot of the data comes from the hydrogen, which you'll see the hydrogen group right here. There's a couple adjustment layers. There's a hue saturation here, a burn dodge layer here, and a selective color. And then on top I have just the RGB stars. So let's just turn everything off and see what the individual pieces look like. There is the red data, and if I open up this group, you can see that I've got just the red that I stretched using Fitz Liberator, and that's covered in some of my other tutorials. So that was what it looked like coming out of Fitz Liberator when it was stretched. And then I did apply a levels adjustment, and by applying this levels adjustment within the group, that causes this adjustment layer to only affect what's in the group. You can think of it as what happens in the group stays in the group. So this is the red, and then I did the same thing with green and blue. I did set a point with the eyedropper tool that I could monitor, and I was able to, I set it right in here in a clear dark area and adjusted all these to about an RGB value of 35. So that gave me a pretty good color balance right out of the gate. I'll turn on the green and blue layers, and just as a reminder, the way I set the colors for each one of these, each one of these groups looks the same. You've got the layer from Fitz Liberator, which started from Deep Sky Stacker, and then a levels adjustment. And then I set a advanced blending option for each one of the layer groups. So if we look at blue, for instance, we can go to Layer, Layer Styles, Blending Options, and that will open up this dialog. And you can see as long as this is an RGB image, which it is, this is a 16-bit RGB image, I have a control here in the center that shows channels, red, green, and blue. Since this is the blue filter and the blue data, I basically just turn off the red and green, and then this layer group only populates the blue channel. I did the same thing with green so that it only populates the green channel. The red layer I really didn't have to do anything with because it has all three, red, green, and blue. The green group replaces the green data, the blue replaces the blue, so we end up with a full color image that you see here. A little bit on the purple side, but again, we're going to add so much hydrogen to this that really doesn't come into much play. Next I have a luminosity layer. I don't frequently use luminosity. In this case it did seem to add a little bit of detail around the main nebula. The stars are getting awfully big and bloated, so at this point I did do a stamp visible. So this was the stamped group. I just opened up this stamped group. And then I made a copy of that and ran star exterminator on that to create a starless layer. And then it had some noise showing up, so I did a couple of retouches. Mostly I did some blurring and also darkened some of these areas that are a little bit on the light side, just using the healing brush. And then last I used a layer in soft light blending mode so that I could darken, selectively darken and lighten areas just by painting on that with either a black or a white brush. And you can see that basically I brought out some of the light here. I darkened some of the areas over on the lower left. There was a little bit of flare further down in the corner that I removed with that retouching. But that gave me my RGB layer. And then I did a little bit of a hue saturation. The next big step is really the hydrogen. Let me zoom back in here a little bit. When I turn on the hydrogen layer, it's dramatic. And the hydrogen layer does a couple things. That first of all, I started out with just the basic hydrogen data from Deep Sky Stacker, and then made a starless version of that. Did some adjustments in the camera raw filter, primarily adding clarity and texture to bring out a little bit more of the detail in here. Added a high-pass filter layer to bring out even more of the texture, especially in this area. Did some levels adjustment, clipped to just that high-pass filter. An overall levels adjustment. And then the last piece here is again some selective burning and dodging, where I darkened the main piece of the nebula through here and then lightened this area by painting with either black at 10% opacity to darken this area, or with white to brighten this area. So if I, just to show you how that works, if I tap B to activate the brush tool, right now I have black as the foreground color. I'll make the brush a little smaller. So we're painting with black at, right now it's 50%. I'll tap the 1 key and that'll choose 10%. If I just paint on this soft light layer with black, it will darken where I painted. If I paint with white, if I just tap the X key to switch to white and paint with white over in these areas that are still pretty dark, I can brighten those. And you'll notice there's kind of a hole here. That is the layer mask on the hydrogen group right here. And the reason I did that, there was a lot of hydrogen that was kind of competing with the nebula. So I turned that off by painting with black on this mask to hide that area. And the other thing I did was I put this group in lighten blending mode. So it's not replacing everything that's underneath it, it's only overlaying where the hydrogen is brighter than what was below it. So if I now turn on everything underneath it, all of the, and I really only need to go down to the RGB composite layer. That's what it looks like as a composite. And since I was playing around with brightening and darkening, I darkened this area. I might want to lighten it back up to bring that red out a little bit more. And if I decide I want to, actually if I want to add some color in here, I can even paint with color on this soft light layer. Which is what I did right here on a separate soft light layer. So I've really done two things here. The hydrogen I've put over top of the rest of it in a soft light blending mode. And I used this burning and dodging layer by painting with either black or white on a blank layer in soft light blending mode to selectively lighten and darken. And you can see the effect that that has. I've got another selective color layer here to adjust the color. And then the last layer on top is the RGB stars. Those were stacked separately and brought over. It was the same stacks out of DSS, so they're all registered the same. But I did a different type of a stretch on the stars to keep more of the star color. I can just turn this layer on, and there are the stars. So if I want a starless image, I just turn those off. If I want it without the hydrogen, I can just turn that off. If I want it without the hydrogen and with the stars, I can turn that on. It gives me a lot of flexibility in turning layers on and off. In the end, I do like the hydrogen. I'm not sure about the stars. Normally, not a big fan of starless images, but in this case, even those small stars really distract from all the fine texture and detail throughout the nebula. So I kind of like this as a starless image as well. That's what I wanted to cover, kind of a fast overview. I do have other tutorials on the channel on YouTube. So if you find this one useful, be sure to give us a like and a subscribe. Check out some of the other video tutorials that I have on the YouTube channel, and you can check out our website at utahdesertremote.com for more images and other blog posts with more details. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great day today and an even better night tonight under a clear, dark sky. Thanks.